Thank you, Darren, and welcome everyone. It's especially a welcome for the members of the families here. I know we have a number of family members of veterans from the 59th in the audience, and I'd really like to extend a special welcome to those. This evening we'll take a journey back in time to the dark days of the Second World War, a journey that takes us from Newfoundland to England, France, Belgium, and on to Germany. For me, it's also a personal journey. My father, Lewis Kelly, was the warrant sergeant in D Battery while the regiment was in England, and later that battery was renumbered as 23 Battery in Northwest Europe. So we'll start, if this works, Darren, there we go, with some acknowledgements for the Imperial War Museum in London and the book by Colonel Nicholson, More Fighting Newfoundlanders. And we've also used for this some of the original war diaries from the 59th Newfoundland Regiment. And in order to talk about the 59th, it's worth putting it in context with what was Newfoundland's overall contribution in the Second World War, because in many ways, it's a huge forgotten sacrifice. We had 22,000 volunteers from the Dominion of Newfoundland in the Second World War out of a population of only 300,000. And we had 1,089 of those killed while serving. And of course, many others were wounded. At sea, we had volunteers in the Royal Navy, the Canadian Navy, the Rescue Tug Service, some in the United States Navy, and in the Merchant Marine. And that's where the bulk of those who were lost were killed, 714 in total. But we also had volunteers in the air. Have you ever heard of the 125th Newfoundland Fighter Squadron? As much as possible, our Newfoundland pilots, gunners, and ground crew were assigned to that squadron. It remained a British squadron, but we also had volunteers in the Air Force, the Canadian Air Force, various roles, bomber command, pilots, gunners, ground crew. 174 of those were killed in action. This is the planes used by the 125th Newfoundland Fighter Squadron. It was a night fighter squadron. In the top left, they started in the old Bolton Paul Defiance. It was a turret fighter, no forward-firing machine guns. The Bristol Beaufighter was the next one up, and by late in the war, they were flying the de Havilland Mosquito, a fantastic airplane made out of Canadian plywood, 2 big Merlin engines, super fast. It was an amazing aircraft. And that squadron fulfilled a night fighter duty all during the war. On land, which is what we're coming to, we had first the 57th Newfoundland Heavy Regiment, which later was transitioned in November of 1941 to the 166th Newfoundland Field Regiment. We'll talk a little bit about them, but our main focus tonight is on the 59th Newfoundland Regiment, but we had volunteers serving in other British Army units, the 2 home Newfoundland regiments, the Newfoundland Regiment and the Newfoundland Militia, the Overseas Forestry Unit, and Canadian Army, and some in the US Army. And it's an interesting comparison with World War I, because in World War I we had 13,000 served and an official death toll of 1,656. Most of those, largest number, were in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and the balance in the Naval Reserve. But in the Second World War, we had 22,000 served and 1,089 killed. And so that's 2/3 of the total of World War I. But we have little recognition of the scale of the sacrifice made by our World War II volunteers. Why is the difference? It's hard to know. One of the reasons may well be that in World War I, we had all these mass casualty events like Beaumont Hamel, Goudecourt, and Monchy, whereas in the Second World War, virtually every ship in the Royal Navy had Newfoundlanders on it. So we lost them 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 3s and 4s. But yet the total loss was 2/3 of all the dead that we had in World War I. Now, to move to our two artillery regiments, we had the 57th Regiment, which was set up in 1940. That was the first group to go over, and they defended the Norfolk coast of England, and in November 41 were converted to the Field Regiment, and they served in North Africa and Italy. The 59th Newfoundland Heavy Regiment was set up in 1940. It defended the south coast of England and then fought in Northwest Europe from July of 1944 to the end of the war in 1945. And an interesting footnote here is the King of England insisted that he wanted to be the honorary colonel for the Newfoundland artillery regiments. And the British artillery people said, no, sir, you can't do that. That's never been done. And King George said, it is going to be done. I am going to be the honorary colonel. And he was, in fact, the honorary colonel for both of our artillery regiments. At home, we had the Newfoundland Regiment, which by 1942 took responsibility for training our soldiers going over. And so the first Newfoundlanders who went over were trained in England, but then from 1942 on, they were trained here in Newfoundland. And so almost half of those who served in the Newfoundland Regiment here actually went overseas during the war. An interesting little footnote, now we have a Newfoundland Regiment hockey team, and it's interesting, this is the hat badge for the Newfoundland Regiment in World War II here in Newfoundland. And you'll see that's what it's modeled off after. And so we think of our Newfoundland Regiment as World War I, but it also has an important World War II connection. Now, the 59th in England itself, there are three periods which are kind of relevant. The first is the formation period from July of 1940 till about June of 1941. Then there's the period that they were actually on the defense of the south coast of England from June of 41 till February 43. And after that, there's this training period where they're getting ready for the invasion of France. And we'll follow them through all three of these periods. So the regiment is formed in essentially June, July 1940. The first three contingents going over essentially formed the 57th. So the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th contingents are what formed the 59th Newfoundland Regiment. And it was technically came into existence on June 15th, 1940, with Colonel Nelson as the lieutenant colonel. And the 4th contingent arrived in Liverpool on July 6, 1940. And they were met on the docks by the Lord Mayor of Liverpool, who said nice words. But they were also met by Colonel Nelson, and this is what he had to say to them. You have listened to a lot of nice words said about you. My message is different. You'll work so hard that you won't even hear the sounds of the bombers when they fly overhead during the German air raids. And you'll see that really became true. The soldiers going over were photographed, and most of the contingent photos exist. This is just by way of example, one of the photos of the 4th contingent going over. I put this one up because soldier 128 up in the second top row is my father, Lewis Kelly. This is Colonel Nelson, who was the commanding officer of the 59th until 1944. The 4th contingent went over on the Nerissa, and I put this slide in for a couple of reasons. It tells a bit about the sacrifice that was also taking place at sea, because the Nerissa carried the 4th contingent in June of 1940, but she was torpedoed and lost in April of 1941 with one of the greatest losses during the war, 207 souls, many of them Canadian soldiers being carried over for the war effort. But 14 Newfoundland crew were lost when she went down. And interestingly, 11 American volunteer pilots who were going over to fight. So this is before the U.S. had actually joined in the Second World War following Pearl Harbor. And the American Eagle Squadron, which fought in the Battle of Britain, and subsequently there's a monument to them outside the American Embassy in London. So the first part is building the regiment. These are when the contingents arrived in Ardingly, which is in the south coast of England. So by October, the full complement was essentially there. This is Brooke House, where they were first posted. And while they were in England, they seem to have done rather well with the accommodation that they got. You can see here Ardingly along the south coast of England. If you look over, you'll see Canterbury on the far right of the screen, and then the area around Rye. And that's an area which is going to become important as the regiment gets developed. But they start in the middle here in Ardingly. And they started with some old World War I pieces, because when they got there, they really didn't have modern equipment. So the 4 batteries were formed, and A battery had 6 mobile guns. And I use mobile cautiously, as you'll see in a minute. B battery had 4 of those. They scrounged up for C battery 4 9.2-inch howitzers. And for D battery, they found 2 9.2s, and they were still short, so they were offered some 12-inch howitzers. Now, a shell for a 12-inch howitzer weighs 750 pounds, just to give you some idea of the size. Now, this is a mobile gun from World War I. You see, it's not very mobile. So they started off with 8 of these guns for A battery and B battery. This is a 9.2, and you'll notice it has no wheels. To move it, you have to take it apart in 3 segments and move it with 3 big tractors. This is the front end of a 9.2. And this is a 9.2. It's variously described as the 57th and the 59th. I really think it's probably a gun of the 57th on the Norfolk coast, but it shows what it looks like dug in. That's Winston Churchill stopping by to have a look. And the King and Queen stopped by to visit a 57th site early in the war. This is a 12-inch gun, and you can see the size of the shell and the lifting equipment that's required to lift it into place. And these are shells for a 12-inch howitzer. So by June of 1941, the regiment was equipped. Now, up to that period in time, before they had these weapons, if the Germans had managed to get across the channel, the Newfoundlanders would largely have fallen into an infantry defense role. But by June of 41, all the batteries were essentially in place, with the exception of the 2 12-inch howitzers, which were to go in at Canterbury. So in June of 41, June 28th to be exact, they moved over to Ashford in Kent, occupying Ashford School. And the 6-inch guns were essentially in mobile reserve. They moved around. The C battery's guns were in the Bonington area, and there were 2 9.2 howitzers from D battery at New Romney, and there'd be, in a minute, we'll see what happens in Canterbury. So this is the area. You see Ashford and the curve of the coast. You can see New Romney, and as you come over here, you'll see Rye. Aldington is where C battery had some guns. This is a 6-inch gun. This is a more modern version. So by 41 and 42, you'll see these have big pneumatic tires. And so A and B batteries were getting a little more modern equipment as things developed. And these are some of the soldiers manning this 6-inch gun. Meanwhile, back on the farm, we have the D battery soldiers training on this 12-inch gun, and the Royal Artillery decided that the Newfoundlanders would put these guns in Dane John Park, which is next to Canterbury Cathedral over in Canterbury. And the idea was these guns would cover the Canterbury-Dover road coming up from Dover, and there were 4 French 75mm field guns that they had. So the idea was, geez, we'll get them with the field guns, or if not, we'll get them with these big heavy guns. This is Canterbury Cathedral on your left. The middle photograph shows one of the ammunition dumps, and the park, Dane John Park, is now being renovated. I took these pictures when I was there in June of this year and realized that there was nothing about the Newfoundlanders in the park other than a passing reference to this is an ammunition storage depot from World War II. So we reached out to the city of Canterbury, and at first they said, well, gee, we have some archaeological problems. Maybe we'll be able to give you a line on one of the storyboards. They're redeveloping the park. But as it turned out, and they got their heads around it, they've decided to have a series of panel boards about the history of Dane John Park, one of which is tentatively named Newfoundlanders in the Gardens. And we're working with the city of Canterbury to work out the language of how that's going to be set up. So that's likely to be unveiled in March of next year with some recognition by the city of Canterbury of the role we played in the World War II. In March of '42, D Battery ended up getting transferred from Canterbury down to Peasmarsh, where they took over 2 big 12-inch guns down here. And there are 10 of these concrete bunkers which stored the big shells. And the center picture is the entranceway into an underground concrete bunker. And this is the back end of the same bunker on the right. And there are a number of other parts of this gun site. It's the only gun site that the Newfoundlanders were at, which is still in a recognizable condition from World War II. And you can see where Peasmarsh is here. And I was down to Peasmarsh. One of our soldiers, Harry Ledrew, got killed in Peasmarsh in a motorcycle accident in January 1943, went off the road at night during the blackout. And Harry is buried in the Peasmarsh church cemetery. It's a little rural church. There's Harry there, and I don't think there's any other soldiers, certainly none from the 59th. Ashford School recognized the role of the 59th. That school is still in existence, and in 2024, they unveiled this memorial to the 59th. So the Ashford School commemorates now Newfoundland Memorial Day on June 28th every year, the day that the Newfoundlanders arrived there in 1941. This is from June of this year. This is the school in the background, and you'll notice they're flying a replica 59th headquarters flag with the Great Seal of Newfoundland. Now, this is the lady who was really instrumental in bringing Ashford School into our Newfoundland community. This is Judith Holloway, and she's at the grave of Walter Pike. And her father's grave is 2 rows in front, and he also was in the Royal Artillery, not in the 59th. And Judith saw this Newfoundland gravestone of Walter Pike and wondered, what is this man doing in Bybrook Cemetery here in Ashford? And took it upon herself, she has a great interest in history, to investigate. And as a result of that, she got in contact with Ashford School and said, do you know, this is where the 59th was based in 1941 through 1945. 1943, and that led to the relationship which we now have with Ashford School. I know Walter's brother was still alive when this was recognized, and he took great comfort in the fact that someone was, that first of all, he now knew where his brother was buried as opposed to simply somewhere in England, and that his grave was being looked after. These are the cadets at Ashford School, and you'll notice if you look carefully, they are wearing the Newfoundland flower of remembrance, the forget-me-not. This is from June of this year. They have a whole room dedicated to the 59th, and this is an interesting archival painting. We're not sure who this mystery woman is, but at the bottom of the painting, it bears this notation: Army Occupation, 59th Newfoundland Heavy Regiment, RA, Southeast District Command. And these are just some photographs from the 2024 ceremony at Ashford School. Now, this one here is interesting. I put this picture in because this is why we remember, in my humble view. And you'll see on the side, what happens here is the soldier in the back left-hand side, that's my father, and he gets leave in July of 1942 to go into England, going to London rather. And as a result, he connects up with all these other Newfoundlanders who are in the 166th Regiment, guys he knows from Grand Falls and guys he got to know. And the soldier second on the right, Charlie Conway, they'd all decide they're going to jam into a photo booth and have their picture taken. And Charlie sends it home to his dad with this little notation: "Dear sir, hope you like this photo. I'd say it's one of the hardest crowds that ever hit London. Ha ha. Taken during leave in London, July 1942. Please hang on to it for me. Good health to you, son Charles." Well, the guy with the big smile in the front is Jimmy Myler, and he's in the 166. They go off to North Africa in 1943, and Jimmy's killed in North Africa when the truck he's in is moving up at night and it goes off an 80-foot embankment. He's buried in Tabaraka Ras Rajel War Cemetery in Tunisia. The two guys in the middle, Charlie Conway on the right and John Vitch on the left, are in the 166. They move on to Italy, and they're both killed on December 9th, 1943, when a German shell comes in and takes out both of them at the same time. And they're buried in Sangro River War Cemetery in Italy. So out of 5 soldiers in this picture, only 2 come home. And as we'll see, my dad gets wounded. The other fellow is Eric Manuel, and Eric's in the 166th. He comes home at the end of the war. So this is putting real faces to those who died. Now, as you get to the fall of 1942, the old World War I equipment is largely gone, and the 4 batteries get equipped with 16 of these new British 7.2 howitzers. And this is how they look and are configured. And you'll notice these have big pneumatic tires, and when they're fired, they roll back on these big chocks. So it takes a bit of time then to get the gun repositioned. And we'll see what happens with that as we go forward. By February 43, it's time to train to get ready to go for the invasion of France. So the 59th moved back to Sussex. This is where they're based. Headquarters is in Hildenborough, Hadlow, Chiddington Castle, and Bidborough. And you can see that on this map here. You can see Hildenborough to the north. Hadlow is towards the top right. Chiddingstone is over to the left there in the middle, and Bidborough is down in the bottom. Apparently, the wine cellar in the house in Bidborough got left intact, and there were a lot of guys in D Battery who wanted to have the nighttime guard duty. And they were found then somewhat intoxicated the next morning. That quickly got a stop put to. As it went on, the 20 and 23 batteries, because the numbers had now changed to 20, 21, 22, 23, were equipped with the American 155 millimeter guns, a little bit smaller shell than the British 7.2, but it had a more stable gun carriage and could fire the shell almost 24 kilometers, over 23 kilometers in total. So it had a bigger range. By 1944, Colonel Longfield takes over the command of the regiment, and he'll command the regiment on through Europe. Now this is, as you get to June of 1944, these are the officers who are going to command the regiment going forward. And all of these guys have a story, and I just want to point out three of them. In the back row, third from the right, is Rupert Jackson, and we'll hear a bit more about him as we talk about him. And in the second row back, about 5 in on the left, you see the soldier with the big smile and the jaunty hat? That's Lieutenant Nat Noel. He became a Supreme Court judge. But he figures in some of the stories. He was a hard judge to appear before if you were not well prepared. And 2 to his left is Lieutenant Durham Griffin, who enlisted with my father. They were sequential numbers in the enlistment roll, and we'll hear a little bit more about him. These are the warrant sergeants of the 59th, who will be the boots on the ground. My father is in the second row from the back, third in from the left side. So by June of 44, there were 16 Newfoundlanders who'd already died, and by the end of the episode, there'll be 24 of them who will have been killed. We had 1 killed in a German bombing raid. A number were killed in road accidents. Several were killed during the training period, and we'll come back and talk about that a little bit more later. Now, it's helpful to have a bit of an understanding about the structure of the army. So in Northwest Europe, it was called the British Second Army. The Newfoundlanders were technically part of 12 Corps, although, as we'll see, they ended up fighting for all of the British corps, and including the Canadian Army as well. And they were technically part of the 3rd Army Group, Royal Artillery, and that's where they nominally stood. So this is the structure. You see 12 Corps up on the top right, 8 Corps over on the top left, 30 Corps, which later became very much the pointy end of the spear, and the airborne divisions. And these are all the other British troop divisions and armored divisions which made up the 2nd Army. So this is what a Newfoundland uniform would look like. The Newfoundland shoulder flash, Royal Artillery, 2nd Army badge, and the flash for Royal Artillery. Royal Artillery cap badge, the 2nd Army badge. This is 12 Corps badge, the oak, the ash, and the thorn tree, and 3rd Agra. And their vehicles carried these caribou emblems, so the caribou was our emblem in World War II, just as in World War I. Now, the regiment actually doesn't cross until July, but one of our soldiers, John Finn, was in Normandy before any of the soldiers hit the beaches on the morning of June 6th, because John Finn was in the 4th contingent going over, and he became a signalman and a driver. And the British airborne troops, which were going in to capture Pegasus Bridge and hold some of the territory around it, needed training to bring in the fire support from the naval guns offshore. So Finn was sent over to train with the British Airborne Division, where, of course, he learned a lot about the D-Day invasion plans, and then, of course, he couldn't go back to the 59th. But then he didn't get left in England either. They loaded him on one of the British gliders with his Jeep, and he went in just after midnight in one of the gliders on the morning of D-Day before any of the Canadian or British troops hit the beaches. And once he got there, he was sent up a church tower where he could literally watch the battlefield. And it's amazing that he actually not only survived Normandy, but he actually survived the war. So we had a Newfoundlander on the ground with the British 6th Airborne right from the opening salvo. And then you remember I mentioned Rupert Jackson. We were in a strange position. We had more members of the regiment than we actually needed. So Rupert Jackson ended up going across about a week after D-Day with the additional members of the regiment. And Jackson was a forward observation officer, again, calling in the naval fire support. So he ended up seconded to an armored battery in an airborne division, and he spent 6 weeks up the top of a 250-foot chimney of a brick kiln near Ranville, helping out the British. Then the crossing of the Channel took place on July 4th and 5th. The city of Caen was supposed to be captured in the first few days, but a month later, it was still in German hands. And so the 59th crossed on the night of July 4th. There were a total of 8 landing craft, what are called tanks, for the guns and heavy vehicles, and a landing ship, which carried most of the men and the smaller vehicles. And this is the landing ship that the Newfoundlanders crossed in. And this is the Newfoundlanders getting loaded on that ship before they sailed. And going across at night, they had minced chicken, sweet corn, canned peaches, and cream. So an army fights on its stomach, they say. This is, if you follow the red line, this is the route that ultimately they all take all the way from France all the way to the Elbe River at the end of the war. And we'll come back to this. This is kind of broken down a little bit as we go forward through the presentation. So the battle for Caen, when the Newfoundlanders get there on the 5th, the first action is the next day. The British 7.2 guns open fire on German tank concentrations back on the roads. And over the next several days, the 59th Guns support British 1st Corps in capturing Caen. 12th Corps is not even fully mobilized yet in Normandy, and it's 1st Corps which has got this task. So Newfoundlanders end up at this stage supporting British 1st Corps. And the 2023 batteries largely assumed the role of counter-battery fire, in other words, targeting German artillery that would shell our guys. And the 7.2s with their big heavy shells were tremendous for knocking out German mortars, machine guns, and other closer in targets. This is my dad, and this is the second week, essentially just a few days in, Operation Jupiter, which is the big battle for Hill 122. And he gets wounded along with other members of a 23rd Battery gun crew by a premature detonation of one of their shells. They're firing on a German position. The shell is supposed to go 10 or 20 kilometers. It goes out of the gun and blows up in their faces. So he gets treated at a Canadian field hospital and evacuated back to England. And they offered to make him a training officer and leave him in England, but he said, well, I didn't come over here to do that. and he went back to France, and he was back in time for the Battle of Falaise. Meanwhile, the battle for Hill 122 was still, or 112 rather, was still going on. The Wessex Division was supposed to capture that in 2 days in the week of July 9th. It was August before they finally, the British and Canadians, finally got the Germans off of Hill 122. That was a absolutely fierce battle with the British taking a huge number of casualties in the, this was 8th Corps largely fighting this battle, and the Wessex lost in the order of 8,000 to 9,000 casualties, dead and wounded, in the battle for Hill 112. A week later, July 17th, we have our first combat casualties. The regiment has advanced as far as Norrie and Besson when there's a German bombing raid. There are 18 bombs fall within 22 batteries area. The ammunition dump of one of their guns is hit, so you had all these high explosive shells going off. 2 Newfoundlanders, Dick Maloney and Mike Lawler, received the British Empire Medal for heroic action in saving 20 batteries number 1 gun. Lieutenant Art Dewling gets wounded. 11 other ranks are wounded. One bombardier, Rupert Bridger, loses a leg, and 2 of our guns are knocked out of action. They'll be replaced, but this was our first real taste of being on the receiving end of German fire. A couple of days later, we have our first combat casualty when John Kitchener-Windsor is killed. He manages to accidentally explode a German grenade, likely a booby trap, which was set. Was buried temporarily at the edge of a cornfield, and he's now buried at Rye's War Cemetery in Brazenville in Normandy. So this is the initial part, and you can see landing at Corsair-sur-Mer. Saint-Gabriel is where they first go into action. Norrie and Besson on the left here is where the first casualties occur. And as Caen is captured, the Americans are swinging around, now have broken through and are coming up from the south, and the Germans are trapped in the Falaise pocket. So there's a big battle that takes place. The Germans suffer heavy defeat at Falaise, and once that happens, this is the route that the Newfoundlanders take moving east. This is one of our guns moving up through France. And this is how Colonel Longfield reports the Normandy battle back to the Newfoundland government. We have together been in a very big battle. First at Caen, a hard fight. Then before Hill 112, probably the most determined resistance the Germans put up in the whole campaign, and a tough nut to crack. The American breakthrough followed by the rapid withdrawal of the Germans, culminating in the slaughter and annihilation of an army in the Falaise Gap. Now, after that, the question was, well, where is Britain going then? Where's the British troops going then? And most everyone will have heard the story of Operation Market Garden. This was the push for the bridges at Arnhem, and the idea was to cut around the German defenses lines by capturing all the bridges all the way through Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem. The Americans take the bridges Eindhoven and Nijmegen, and the British go into Arnhem. Unfortunately, there are very strong German concentrations there, and the 30 Corps never manages to break through to Arnhem. 10,000 British soldiers and Polish soldiers go into Arnhem, only 2,000 eventually get out. And the Newfoundlanders play a role in this, because while 30 Corps is the pointy end of the spear, 12 Corps has a role on the left flank, and what's left of 8th Corps, which was seriously diminished after Normandy, is supposed to hold the right flank. The only problem is, at this stage, all of the supplies have to come all the way from Normandy. So only one of the Newfoundland batteries can go forward to support 12 Corps. And they literally flip a coin to see which of the 155 batteries is going to go. And 23 battery wins the towing costs, or loses the towing costs, depending on how you look at it. So 23 battery is detached from the rest of the regiment, and they go barreling across from France. Now, on the way, the British overrun Antwerp, and this is a major accomplishment because after Normandy, the Canadian Army is tasked to clear the Channel ports, and British First Corps is assigned to support the Canadians. And so they capture Boulogne, but the Germans blow up all the port facilities. They capture Calais, but the Germans blow up all the port facilities. And so they're still fighting up the coast when, as the thrust from Operation Market Garden's happening, the British overrun Antwerp and capture all of the port facilities intact. The only problem is Antwerp is way up from the coast, and it's at this stage still of no use because you can't get past the Germans occupying the coast. Now, at this stage, the 23 battery is at Borsbeek, very near Antwerp, and are supporting the 53rd Welsh Division, which is holding Antwerp. And on September 11 and 12, Fire Plan Splash is employed. These are the Newfoundland guns firing against the German artillery mortars and enemy troops. And we're fortunate, we actually have film of this event. And this is one of the Newfoundland guns. And here's the first piece of the film. The soldier without his helmet in the middle, that's my dad. You notice later on he's sitting on the first aid box with a helmet on. There's no sound to this, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for your ears. It's him sitting on the first aid box. A faulty detonator. This sequence runs about a minute. And here's another sequence. These are more Newfoundland guns. This sequence runs a bit longer, and it has much better close-ups of some of the Newfoundland gunners. And as you're watching this, note the size of the equipment, because later on you'll see how this stuff gets wielded around as if it's field artillery. If you got a premature detonation within the gun, that is, you can imagine how devastating that is. And that actually happened to one of the guns in Belgium, not the 23 battery gun, but it blew the breech block off and buried it several feet into the ground. Fortunately, no one was killed. Only just realized this film was in the Imperial War Museum. So these are our boys from Newfoundland. Okay, so back to Operation Market Garden. This is the big push. And there's an interesting little side story here. Remember I mentioned Nat Knoll and Durham Griffin. They were supposed to be back in France. But as 23 Battery is advancing for Operation Market Garden, who do they run into on one of the roadblocks but Durham Griffin and Nat Knoll? And so 23 Battery looks at them and says, geez, what'd you guys come up here to get in on the action? And Knoll and Griffin respond, no, we're here to make sure it's safe for you guys to be here. 23 Battery, part of what their job was after Antwerp was to cover the Tilburg-Herzenbosch road that the Germans still had control of as 30 Corps is trying to move up to the right of that. So they had one gun pushed 2 kilometers forward to extend the maximum range. And that's essentially what I was just saying. And you can see in this shot, note Rüssel down here in the bottom. Rüssel is held by a crack German paratroop regiment, and it's at a key crossroads. And at the tail end of September, Operation Market Garden has failed in the sense that the British had 10,000 troops in Arnhem. They're desperately trying to get their troops out, and they don't want this paratroop regiment moving north to cause trouble. So they send the 53rd Welsh Division into Rüssel. And there's a fierce battle that rages in Rüssel for 3 days, back and forth. And at various times, the Welsh have Germans surrounded, and at other times, the Germans have Welsh troops surrounded, and they actually speak Welsh, so the Germans won't know what they're saying as they try to get out. And at one stage, the battle actually rages right through the center of the church with the Welsh troops at the front and the Germans at the back. And 23 Battery is firing as required to support the Welsh troops. And then the Welsh troops withdraw on the 27th. The British got out whatever they could from Arnhem. And at that stage, 23 Battery opens up on what's left of the Germans. And when they go back in on October 3rd, the Welsh troops, there's no more resistance. The museum in Rüssel has discovered that it was the Newfoundlanders who liberated their town, in particular 23 Battery. And the museum in Rüssel is now set up a memorial which recognizes, as in their museum, they have an exhibition of especially the 23rd Battery of the 59th Regiment. This is the actual war diary pages talking about the battle at Rüssel. And you can see halfway down, moved to a new position in order to be engaged targets at Rüssel, engaged targets, own troops withdrawn from the area. And then the next one, engage crossroads in Rüssel at irregular intervals with one gun. That's probably the far forward gun. Total expenditure of 48 rounds. And then they move on to Wegel, which is much further up north. And after Operation Market Garden, 12 Corps and 23 Battery then go on to clear Herzenbosch, which is in Holland, they just call it Den Bosch, and Tilburg. So that area gets liberated by the British troops of 12 Corps, supported by the 23 Battery guns. and it's not till November 11th that they all get back together. And this is what Colonel Longfield reports. 23 Battery under Major Stone went forward and was in the van right up trying to close the gap between the 2nd Army troops at Nijmegen and the Airborne Division at Arnhem. Now, meanwhile, the Battle of the Scheldt takes place. So after clearing the Channel ports, the Canadian Army and First Corps have to clear the Scheldt, and the Germans have flooded this area. This is where the Canadian Army develops the name the Water Rats, and they get deployed in the flooded areas in a number of occasions. So at this stage, 20, 21, and 22 batteries are supporting the Canadian Army clearing the Scheldt. And you can see here, this is the Scheldt estuary and the flooded areas. And you'll see where Antwerp is, so you can't get ships into Antwerp until after the Germans have been cleared out of this area. So if I just go back, the Scheldt is cleared on November 8th, and the first shipping reaches Antwerp at the end of November. And this is a huge move because up till now, all of the supplies have had to come all the way to from Normandy, and that was really slowing down the whole war effort. So Newfoundland plays a key role in clearing out the Scheldt. And this is Colonel Longfield's report. Then when the Germans surprisingly went on with the war, the regiment, much to everyone's satisfaction, joined the Canadians at the Leopold Canal. We were in action about a mile from it. What a fight, and followed by a worse one for the Breskens Peninsula. This, I think, was the worst, nearly the whole country underwater by flooding, unbelievable heavy artillery positions occupied, and even more difficult, evacuated for advances. In other words, geez, you got to get these heavy guns in the mud, then you got to get them out again. So the next big thing that happens is the Battle of the Bulge, where, as you probably know, the Germans break through the American lines to the south in an offensive to take Brussels and recapture Antwerp and split the forces. And if you look north, you can in the map, you can see where Tilburg is and Eindhoven. So the Newfoundlanders are way up there, and the two 155 batteries, 20 and 23, get sent down to support 30 Corps, which is the British pointy spear moving down to cut off the Germans. When you read the history of the Battle of the Bulge, it's all portrayed as an American story, but it's not simply an American story. The British play a key role, and Newfoundland's two batteries play a key role. And you can see on the map where Liège and Namur and Hué is. And so the Newfoundlanders occupy the high ground on that side of the River Meuse. And then, so these are the initial defensive positions. So Christmas Day, 1944, both of the batteries are on the move. 23 Battery is moving down to block the Hué bridges. 20 Battery is taking up positions near Namur. 20 Battery managed to get its tin turkey and Christmas puddings, so they had to eat it in the same mess tin. And the poor guys over in 23 Battery had bully beef and jam sandwiches. One of my colleagues, somewhat jokingly, said, "Yes, Ian, and what kind of jam was it?" Which was an interesting question, because it wouldn't be strawberry jam. After a bit of investigation, as near as I could figure, it was probably some plum jam combination, which is what the guys in the trucks would have had. This is the river at the Meuse. The Germans are on the other side of the river. This is the side the Newfoundlanders were on. And the Germans never make it within the range of the Newfoundland guns. So on December 30th, the Newfoundlanders move forward, cross the Meuse, and fire on German positions as needed. And that really is the end of the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans are essentially wiped out in the ensuing days. After that, the Newfoundlanders move back north again and clear an area called the Rohrmann Triangle, which actually has some parts of it are actually in Germany itself. And this is where things go terribly wrong for 20 battery. This area is heavily mined. On the 24th of January, a couple of guys are wounded by German mines. And on February 6th, a bunch of them get trapped in a minefield, and Andrew Churchill and Philip Coleman get killed by German mines, and 2 other men get trapped in the same minefield, and the rescue party is led by Lieutenant Rupert Jackson again. And one of the interesting things about Jackson is when he was taking his mine clearing training, he accidentally tripped one of the dummy mines. So when Rupert Jackson was coming to rescue you, you were probably a little bit nervous. In any event, despite the darkness and the driving rain, they managed to get out the trapped men and retrieve the bodies. Andrew Churchill and Coleman are buried in the Sittard War Cemetery in the Netherlands. This is Colonel Longfield's report. Anyway, Christmas Day finds both 155 batteries, 20 and 23, on the move in the Ardennes. A description of the battle in brief. Lovely scenery, deep snow, bitter cold, and icy roads. The attack broken, the batteries moved north to attack the Rohrmann salient from the west on German soil for the first time. Here, nothing but devastated towns, snow and ice, booby traps and mines. The rest of the regiment also supported the attack from the west of the Maas. This is the next big battle is the Rhineland battle. This is the last big major German defensive line before the Rhine River. So these are the Newfoundland guns moving up. And this is a great map that shows the area. You see Nijmegen and Groesbeek. The battle essentially starts at Groesbeek. Our troops, our artillery, the 20 and 23 are over near Linden, 21 and 22 around Mook. And you'll see there's several lines that they have to break through here. The Reichwald Forest is the first bit, and then the Hochwald layback. The idea is to get to Zantern and then across the Rhine River. So this is the crossroads at Groesbeek. This picture is 2 Churchill tanks in 1944. This is a picture, I took that picture. We stayed in that inn and twice had dinner under the tree. So it's actually the same tree as in 1944. Down the hill behind that is the front line. That's German territory. Our boys are slightly to the right of that turn. The flooded area for the Canadians is over behind. The high ground is in front of this location. It's where the generals, you could actually stand and see the whole layout. And it's up there that the Canadian War Cemetery is located. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So this is the Reichwald Forest, Operation Veritable. Canadians on the left. Again, they get the flooded area moving forward. British 30 Corps is in the center. Newfoundland batteries in position. There's strong German resistance. They finally capture Cleve by the 12th and Gach by the 21st. One of our guns in position. The next one is getting through the second line of defense. Our boys are again supporting the 30 Corps advance. They finally break through on the 3rd of March with the Scottish troops, the Lowland Division, reaching Wesel and finally linking up with the Canadians on the left in the flooded area and the Americans on the right. And so then it's the preparation for the Rhine crossing, and our 7.2s did a masterful job of knocking out all the German observation posts on the other side of the river. They got really quite adept at taking off church steeples. And there was one they were having trouble with. And so Nat Knoll went forward as far as he could get and called in the shells. And in 20 more rounds, they took out the last of the German observation posts. The Americans were very impressed and said, "Can you come down and do that for us?" And unfortunately, they said, "No, I'm sorry, but we got other orders." This is Colonel Longfield again. Terrific fighting in the Reichwald, advanced the devastated Gok on to Zantern, a pause and the posing for the Rhine crossing, and the most impressive combined land and air operation, ending in the complete disintegration of the German line. This is the Canadian War Cemetery at Grosbeek, very moving. 2,338 Canadians and 100 others with no known grave. By February of 45, 21 and 22 batteries get new British guns, but mounted on the American gun carriage. This is the picture of the one down in Pleasantville, and this is the gun that they have in the last few months of the war, but it's not the type of weapon that they had for the vast bulk of the fighting. Then's the crossing of the Rhine. 12 Corps goes ahead with the 15th Scottish, with the British 7.2s firing advance in support. Durham Griffin is the first guy to get across the Rhine as a forward observation officer, and the whole regiment is across on March 27th. And from there, there's a rapid advance to the River Elbe. And at this point, the Newfoundland guns, every time they run into some opposition, the Newfoundland guns swing around, swing into action, and our boys are fielding these guns, these heavy weapons, as if they were field artillery. And so they fire, they knock out the German resistance, and there's a rapid advance. And you can see this is crossing the Rhine, and in a month, this is where they are in Hamburg in Germany. And then the Newfoundlanders are engaged in the beginning of the Cold War. Whoa! Part of the reason to get to the Rhine is not only to defeat Germany, but it's to stop the Russians. So April 28th is Operation Enterprise. Our guns knock out any remaining resistance on the other side of the River Elbe. The Scottish Division crosses. The 11th Armoured Division goes in. The British paratroopers and the 1st Canadian Paratroop Regiment race north to Wismar to cut off the Russians. They set up roadblocks to stop the Russian advance into Germany and Denmark. And it's the Canadians who first run into the Russians. At first they have a vodka, but after a day or two, it's like, hold on now, we got to keep moving. No, this is as far as you're going. And at one stage, the British Major General says, this is as far as you're going, or we'll open up with our heavy artillery. Now, our guns were out of range, so I don't know what he was going to use, but the Russians stopped. You can see Wismar up here. Wismar is eventually, the British withdraw from Wismar. It becomes the westernmost town in East Germany, and Lübeck becomes part of West Germany, and Denmark is saved. You see the River Elbe runs out at the other side of Denmark. So this was keeping the Russians out of Denmark in effect, and that northern part of Germany. So then you have the end of Germany surrenders on the 5th of May. The Newfoundlanders move south to Hamburg, and they go into Neuengamme concentration camp. And that's interesting because many of you will know the Anne Frank story, the Jewish girl who was in hiding in Amsterdam. Well, Fritz Pfeffer was one of the people in hiding, and he was sent to Neuengamme, and he died there in 1944. The other part of Neuengamme, which is an absolutely horrific story, is there were no survivors actually in Neuengamme. But about 100,000 through this forced labor camp. There were about 10,000 still alive towards the end of the war. And the Germans put them on 3 ships and were going to take them out into the Baltic Sea and sink the ships. Unfortunately, the British, thinking that the ships carried Germans trying to escape, attacked 2 of the ships, sinking the Teelbach and the Cap Arcona, and 7,000 odd survivors of Newfoundland died in that tragic sinking. I put this picture in to symbolize the defeat of Nazi Germany at the end of the war. This is a picture taken in 1939 of Hitler on at City Hall in Hamburg. And notice the banners in the background. This is a captured Nazi banner from Hamburg, Germany, and this on the right is the original 59th headquarters flag from World War II. So this is our contribution to the defeat of Nazi Germany. That original flag is, you can see that in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment Museum. This is one that my father brought back and gave to my nephew at the end of, his nephew at the end of the war. And it is one of two that I know about which were brought back from Hamburg at the end of the war. This is 23 Battery at Bergdorf. They all had their picture taken at the end of the war. This is the only battery picture that I have of high quality, but there are pictures of the other 3 batteries as well. This is Colonel Longfield's report. Over the Rhine, the only heavy artillery to go, and on till the end. So this, like the Newfoundland guns, were the key in the last push. We're running out of time here. And there it is, battle honors for the regiment. It has them all. I just want to read this bit. There's the outline story. When your boys get home, ask them to fill in the detail. They have done a fine job and are rightly proud of it. I think you'll find that they say the last year was worth the 4 years of waiting. As their colonel, let me say as epilogue, if there is any job requiring courage, determination, and hard work, these men will do it if it is within the bounds of human endeavor. A really fine lot of men I am proud to command. These are the soldiers killed. We don't have enough time to go through them all. This is the 24. On Friday, the cadets at Ashford School will attend a service at St. Mary's Church in Ashford. 24 cadets will march in rows of 2 to the altar with 24 poppies designed by their design students, each with the name of one of these Newfoundland soldiers on a forget-me-not card, and lay those poppies on the altar at St. Mary's Church in Ashford in England. This is the route again. We'll skip through that. This is an epilogue. Remember my dad got wounded in Normandy? He was sent out to Stanford Hall, south of Nottingham. My mother was a nurse at Nottingham Hospital, got rotated down to Stanford Hall where she met my father. But during the war, both of the ferries to Newfoundland got commandeered by the Admiralty and were sunk. So it wasn't until July of 1946 that they had a ship to bring over the girlfriends and some of the war brides. Some of the war brides came in the winter. So this is July of 1946, which is an epilogue to our 59th story. And that's the end.